You've heard of Spitfires, Churchills, and the Blitz. But buried in Britain's wartime arsenal was a battlefield Frankenstein, the OXA Gun Truck. Civilian lorries, hastily armoured in boilerplate, rushed into service when invasion felt days away. This video breaks down what they were, how they worked, and why they disappeared after 1942. Because when the front line is your backyard, even delivery trucks go to war. Let's start with why these things existed in the first place. In the summer of 1940, Home Guard units were told to hold roadblocks against German armour, with little more than rifles and a handful of outdated anti-tank weapons. That wasn't propaganda, it was policy. After France collapsed, Britain faced invasion with a dangerously thin stockpile of modern anti-tank guns. Factories couldn't produce new weapons fast enough. Imports were uncertain. Waiting for ideal equipment wasn't an option. The army needed mass and speed. Something that could move weapons where they were needed, survive small arms fire, and give defenders a fighting chance. That forced planners to abandon traditional thinking. Instead of asking what kind of vehicle should exist, they asked what already did. Civilian trucks were everywhere. They ran, they were familiar, they could be converted immediately. So Britain made a blunt decision. Take what you have, arm it, and put it on the road, even if it was ugly, slow, and temporary. So what truck did they choose? The Bedford OXD 1.5-ton lorry was a familiar sight across Britain before the war, hauling mail, supplies, and commercial goods. It was never designed for combat, but that familiarity was exactly its advantage. Mechanics already knew how to service it. Spare parts existed nationwide, production lines were already running. No retraining, no retooling. Engineers didn't redesign the truck, they reused the civilian chassis and layered military requirements on top. Armour came later, weapons came later. The truck itself stayed fundamentally the same. Even the name OXA masked the truth. It sounded like a formal military designation, but underneath, it was still a Bedford delivery lorry pushed into combat by necessity. Now, how do you actually armour a mail truck for war? You don't overthink it. OXA construction skipped refinement entirely. Engineers took 9mm boilerplate, the kind used in industrial applications, and bolted it directly onto the existing frame. Flat panels, straight cuts, minimal welding. Anything that slowed production was removed from the process. Visibility was poor, protection was uneven. But conversions happened fast and in large numbers. Multiple facilities could repeat the same solution without coordination delays. In 1940, scale mattered more than polish. Armour is one thing, but what about weapons? The boys' anti-tank rifle was already falling behind modern armour by 1940, but Britain had large numbers available. Instead of relying on a single weapon, planners mounted 6. The idea wasn't precision, it was coverage. Multiple firing points meant overlapping arcs and a greater chance of hitting something vulnerable. A Bren-light machine gun handled infantry threats, giving the OXA some ability to defend against attackers on foot. This wasn't refined firepower, it was layered volume. Everything that could shoot was given a role. This might sound like a small-scale experiment. It wasn't. Between 1940 and 1941, Britain produced 948 OXA gun trucks. That number alone shows how serious the situation was. They were issued to regular army units, but even more to the Home Guard, the force responsible for defending local infrastructure if invasion came. OXAs weren't sent to front lines. They were spread across Britain wherever armoured presence was needed, but proper tanks were too valuable to station. But here's the thing. These weren't offensive weapons. OXAs were too slow, too exposed, and too thinly protected to survive offensive action. Crews trained accordingly. If a convoy took fire, the job was to shoot back, hold position, and protect the vehicles behind, not chase attackers. Once contact broke, the convoy moved on. Mobility existed only to reach defensive positions, not exploit them. So how much protection did that boilerplate actually provide? It stopped small arms fire and fragments. That alone was a significant improvement over bare trucks. But rifle-caliber rounds at the right angle could punch through. Anything heavier went straight through. Survival depended on positioning and luck. OXAs were built to survive ambushes, not sustained firefights. And the speed? That took a hit too. The Bedford engine produced 72 horsepower. Armoured, the truck weighed over 6 tons. Acceleration was sluggish, hills became a struggle, convoys slowed to accommodate the OXA's limits, top speed rarely exceeded 50 kilometres per hour. These drawbacks were accepted, protection came at a cost. You might wonder why the engine didn't just fail under all that extra weight. Despite being overworked and underpowered, the Bedford engine proved reliable. Crews learned how to keep it running under constant stress. In a crisis, reliability beats performance. The OXA kept moving when it mattered. With a vehicle this slow and this blind, how do you actually protect a convoy? You build your tactics around the limitations. OXAs were never deployed alone. Standard doctrine placed them at the front, middle and rear of supply columns, creating overlapping fields of fire across the convoy's length. The lead truck provided early warning. If it took fire, the rest of the column knew trouble was ahead before driving into it. Mid-column trucks shielded the cargo vehicles directly. The tail gunner watched the rear and prevented attackers from boxing the convoy in. Radio coordination filled the gaps left by poor visibility. Spotters called out threats. Commanders directed fire. The convoy moved as a single organism, not a string of isolated vehicles. Routes were planned around the OXA's limits, steep grades were avoided, rest stops prevented engine overheating. If a road was too narrow to turn around, planners found another road. The trucks didn't just travel with convoys, they dictated how convoys moved. As the war progressed, a new threat emerged, and crews had to adapt. By 1941, German anti-tank weapons were evolving. Shaped charges, warheads that focus explosive energy into a penetrating jet, could slice through flat armour that stopped ordinary rounds. The solution came from field workshops, not factories. Engineers welded steel lattice frames and wire mesh onto the OXA's exterior, standing several inches off the main plate. The idea was simple: detonate the charge early. If the warhead hit mesh first, it exploded before reaching the truck's hull. The penetrating jet formed in open air instead of against armour, dispersing before it could do real damage. These modifications weren't standardised. Different units built different versions from whatever scrap they had. Some used rebar, others used expanded metal, a few improvised with chain link fencing. None of it looked professional, all of it worked better than bare plate. Decades later, American forces in Iraq would bolt similar cage armour onto Humvees and MRAP to defeat rocket-propelled grenades. The principle was identical to what British mechanics figured out in 1941 with welding torches and scrap metal. So where were these trucks actually stationed? Everywhere that mattered, but nowhere a real tank would go. Britain's tank inventory was critically low. What armour existed was held in reserve for counter-invasion, not scattered across the countryside. But airfields still needed guarding. So did rail junctions, ammunition depots, and fuel stores. OXAs filled that gap. They stationed at RAF bases across southern England, providing ground defence against paratroopers and saboteurs. A single OXA near a runway couldn't stop an armoured assault, but it could cut down lightly armed infiltrators before they reached the aircraft. Rail yards got similar treatment. Britain's war effort ran on trains, coal, ammunition, food, troops. A demolition charge in the right place could paralyse logistics for days. OXAs provided deterrence and rapid response. Coastal positions used them too. Beach defences needed mobile firepower that could relocate if landing sites shifted. OXAs weren't fast, but faster than dragging a field gun through sand. The common thread was expendability. Anywhere a real tank was too valuable to risk, an OXA absorbed the danger instead. To understand who actually crewed most of these trucks, you need to understand the Home Guard. The Home Guard wasn't a military unit in the traditional sense. It was a volunteer force, shop owners, factory workers, farmers, retired veterans, given uniforms and told to defend their own towns if the Germans landed. At its peak, the Home Guard numbered over 1.5 million. Most had no combat experience. Many were too old or too young for regular service. Their job was to delay, disrupt, and hold in place, buying time for the professional army to counterattack. Equipment was always short. Home Guard units trained with wooden rifles, drainpipe mortars, and improvised explosives. When real weapons arrived, they were usually obsolete models the army had already discarded. The OXA fit that pattern. It wasn't good enough for frontline units. But it gave men who might otherwise face tanks with Molotov cocktails a reason to believe they could survive long enough to matter. Whether that belief was justified is another question. In 1940, belief was a weapon too. You might ask, why not just build proper armoured cars instead? Purpose-built vehicles like the Humber or Lanchester required new factories, specialised materials, and time Britain didn't have. The OXA required none of that. Existing trucks, existing steel, existing workforce. It traded quality for immediacy, and immediacy won. So what happened to all 948 of them? As better equipment arrived through 1941 and 1942, OXAs were withdrawn from service and scrapped. Every single one. Not one example survives today. No museum pieces, no restorations. Just blueprints and production records. They served their purpose and vanished, which tells you exactly what they were built for. But the OXA's influence didn't end in 1942. The concept came back decades later in different wars. Vietnam proved it first. American supply convoys running coastal highways faced constant ambush. The Army's response looked familiar. Weld steel to cargo trucks, mount machine guns, send them out as escorts. They called them gun trucks. Names like Eve of Destruction and King Kong painted on armour salvaged from helicopters and scrapyards. The crews would have recognised the OXA immediately. Same logic, same risks. Iraq brought round 3. When roadside bombs became the deadliest threat facing coalition forces, up-armoured Humvees and bolt-on armour kits became standard. Soldiers welded whatever steel they could find onto vehicles never designed to carry it. The pattern keeps repeating because the problem never changes. Wars move faster than factories. Armies always need more armour than they have. Someone always figures out that a truck with steel bolted to it beats a truck without. The OXA wasn't a dead end. It was a template. And the OXA wasn't Bedford's only contribution to the war. Far from it. Bedford wasn't a military contractor before 1939. It built commercial trucks for businesses moving goods on British roads. When war came, the operation transformed. The same factories that produced delivery lorries started producing military transport. The Bedford MW became the Army's standard light truck, over 65,000 built, serving every theatre from North Africa to Burma. The QL series handled heavier loads and rougher terrain, becoming the backbone of logistics that kept ammunition, fuel and food moving forward. The OXA was a side project, a temporary fix for a temporary crisis. But it proved civilian industry could militarise almost overnight when survival demanded it. That lesson extended beyond Bedford. Furniture factories made aircraft parts. Textile mills produced parachutes. Toy companies manufactured shell casings. The OXA was one example of a nationwide improvisation that turned an industrial economy into a war machine. One more thing worth mentioning, that engine. The same 3.5-litre petrol engine meant for city deliveries powered an armoured gun platform under combat stress. It wasn't designed for it. It handled it anyway. And that says something about what happens when you ask ordinary machinery to do extraordinary things. So how should we remember the OXA? Every compromise it made was for speed. Nothing about it was meant to last. Its value wasn't in armour, thickness or firepower. It was in how fast Britain could turn soft-skinned trucks into hard targets and get them on the road before the Germans arrived. The OXA was a reaction, not a plan. And sometimes that's enough.